Terence, we've just awarded your good self an honorary doctorate from Edinburgh University, and one of the words that you used in your speech, your response to my citation, is filmmakers need passion. And I wondered whether that was in you when you began your filmmaking career. Was that part of the inspiration that got you going?
No, because I wanted to be an actor and a writer. I mean, I'd grown up with my sisters in the early 50s. This is where the great musical comedies were made in America. I mean, that's the golden era. And I grew up on those because my sister took me. In fact, at 7, I was taken to see Singing in the Rain at the Odeon. It was a wonderful start. But no, I never thought of anything like that, this kind of career. People from working class backgrounds did not go into the movie business, or if they did, they went in as actors or technicians. But I never ever thought of this. I wanted to act and write at first.
And I guess if someone from your background had gone into acting, then they would most likely be restricted to certain stereotypes or caricatures of working class people.
Well, there was 2 options: either that, or you made sure you lost your accent. Because even in the late 50s, early 60s, stars in Britain wouldn't do provincial accents because they were afraid their fans thought they spoke like that. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, and it lasted until the 60s. So that was the only choice. But when I went into drama school, my first year, I wrote children. I don't know where it came from, it just came, and I wrote it as I saw it.
You wrote that as a screenplay, or was that as a novella? Or?
No, it was written as a screenplay, and sent it all over England. Everyone turned it down, so that it can't be any good then. And then I heard that the BFI had a production board, so off I sent my script. And about 6 months later, Mamoon Hassan, who was running it then, said, "Come down and see me," and it was at Waterloo, just outside Waterloo Station. And I went in and he said, "You have £8,500, not a penny more, you will direct." I said, "I've never directed before." So, "Well, now's your chance."
So your original beginnings was really as a screenwriter then. You wrote the script for the story Children. But what did you do then to direct? Did you suddenly go, crash course in direction, or did someone come along and kind of mentor you in some way?
No, it was a baptism by fire, because I got the script, and apart from Bill Diver, who shot it for me, it was a 3-week shoot, and they told me every single day how awful the script was, how bad my direction was, how completely inept I was. At the end of 3 weeks, I just thought, I've got obviously no talent at all, and I had to go back to drama school, because those days we were on a grant system, thank God. And if you left before the end of your course, you had to pay the whole of the grant back, and I couldn't pay it back. Anyway, by this time Mamoon had left, and we had all this 16mm spaghetti, which was just so awful. It was absolutely lifeless. By this time Mamoon had left and Peter Sainsbury had taken over, and they said, "Look, you've wasted £8,500. In 1973, that was a lot of money." He said, "No, I don't think so. Would you be prepared to go back into the cutting room?" I said, "Well, yes, but I'm telling you now, you've wasted all this money." He said, "Well, I think I know someone who would be sympathetic." And she was a woman called Sarah. And she was just so kind to me. And I remember the very first day she said, "Is there anything that you'd like to recut? Because it's been cut by someone else." It was a complete mess. I said, "Well, can I just look at the end?" I said, "Can we just do it as I imagined it?" "Well, you tell me how you imagined it." So I did. And those days you sent it off to the laboratory, and it took 2 days. 2 days came back, and we ran it on the steam bank. And she just turned around to me, she said, "You were right." And it was the first inkling that I thought I might have some talent.
But in that beginning of your filmmaking career, were there any directors that were in your mind when you were approaching Children? I mean, you mentioned enjoying the musicals in the Odeon and that style of filmmaking. That doesn't really come into your filmmaking until maybe aspects of that Long Day Closes, perhaps. Yes. So were there any directors around that time?
No, because I mean, in Liverpool those days, I mean, you couldn't see art films. You know, I mean, you just couldn't see them. Where my education started was on television, BBC One, on a Sunday afternoon, and it was called Love Story. And all sorts of films were in it. Letter from an Unknown Woman, Night of the Hunter. I mean, hard to believe now that they would show those. I mean, that's where my real education began, because I began looking, instead of just looking at something, I began to try and work out why something worked, especially with music. I mean, I was brought up with music, with people singing at home, and I was brought up on popular music. I only discovered classical music later, but that grounding of my sisters loving musicals and going to see them and seeing movement with music, and something stayed with me. I didn't know what it was. I just loved the idea of, you know, seeing something move and there was music behind it. It seemed to me to be just so magical. But that stayed with me. That was later.
Yeah, I know, but that combination of music and movement is what, to me, kind of epitomizes the best of your films in Distant Voices and Long Day Closes. And I find them, I have a personal resonance with them, because when I watch those films, it takes me back immediately to, you know, working class families in Liverpool, because those scenes of people communally singing in pubs, families, uncles, nieces, nephews, I find it has a sort of deep realism about it for me. I am presuming that that's from your background as well, and the role of your family as inspirers for your film. Well, you draw a lot on your family background for those films.
Yes, but when you're a child and the youngest of 7 surviving children, you know, you just look and you listen. You absorb the world every day. And that's what you did. I mean, they went out, they went to the pub, they came back at 10:30, they played a few records, they had a few dances, and then they began to sing. And everyone had their own song, and everyone knew what a group song was. I mean, that was just, it happened every single Saturday. I mean, it just did. So I grew up with that as that was part of living. Everyone did. And there were some people with wonderful voices, you know, that, you know, really, you'd love to hear them sing. My mother had a lovely, mellifluous voice. So I grew up with that. I mean, they used to say on the continent that Britain was a land without music, but that's not true. It wasn't. And a lot of people on the continent said, you know, do people still do that? I told them, I said, no, that's long since died. They don't do that anymore. Because those days, popular music was written to be sung. When you got a 78, you usually had the lyrics on the back. And popular music now is not meant to be sung. You can't even reproduce it. And where I began to be disillusioned with pop music, as it were, there was still that great American songbook right up until Cole Porter, who in the middle 50s. And my sister took me to see Jailhouse Rock, and I remember at 10 cringing all the way through, thinking, isn't he ridiculous in this awful voice? And then the Beatles came along, and they were even worse. But I discovered classical music by chance.
But I think you've told me before that you were working in Liverpool in Matthew Street in one of the offices as a shipping clerk, and the whole Matthew Street experience of the Beatles passing you by.
Yes. Well, it wasn't in Matthew Street, it was the street opposite, called Harrington Street, and I was working at an accountant's office there. No, I thought they were terrible, still do. I've never understood why they're considered, you know, good songwriters, especially when you grow up with Cole Porter and Rodgers and Hart. You know, the lyrics are feeble by comparison. You know, because I love Cole Porter. I love that. No one can write that kind of wit now, and he did it effortlessly. There's one of the minor songs which I do love, and I feel it is my signature tune. The wind is chasing the zephyr, the moon is chasing the sea, the bull is chasing the heifer, but nobody's chasing me.
That's good. Can I move a bit forward from what we could call your autobiographical kind of period, with Distant Voices Still Lives and The Long Day Closes? But you've been making, of late, a number of, obviously, new films. Since the documentary of Time in the City, you've made The Deep Blue Sea, the Terence Davies adaptation, but also 2 recent films. And would you like to tell us a bit about those 2 films?
One is called Sunset Song, which is from a novel by Lewis Grassic Gibbon, which is part of a trilogy of novels. It's considered the greatest Scottish novel. And in 1971, they serialised it on BBC on a Sunday night. And those days you had to wait each week for the next episode. And I just lived for Sundays, you know, because I love the story. I really love the story. And I read the book, which is quite difficult to read because it's in the Doric.
Is that a dialect?
That's a dialect.
It's a dialect of the Scottish language.
It's a dialect in Aberdeenshire, so it makes it quite difficult. But it is a great work, and everybody, most people in Scotland have read it. But it was a wonderful book, and I read it, I thought, I'd love to do this at some stage. And then you think, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to get the money to do that. It'll be far too expensive, and, you know, I won't cast stars because I think that's a lot of nonsense. So we'll never get the money. We did, and it was quite an experience, shall we say, because there wasn't enough money, and we had to go to New Zealand for the summer weather.
To suit Scotland in New Zealand. Yeah.
Only for the summer weather, because you can't rely on it in Scotland. And we got to New Zealand, and it was the worst weather they'd had for 50 years. I thought, oh, terrific. You know, why didn't we stay in Scotland? I could have got this for free. Luckily, the weather changed. We got 3-4 days of wonderful sunshine, so we could do those shots. But it was very hard because of not enough money and sitting in a farm, pouring with rain, and animals defecating and farting all over the place. It's not glamorous.
How long was that in progression to make that film, from the time when you started to perhaps work on some ideas? Because I do recall Scottish producers getting involved in that.
I started writing the first draft in 2000. I finished it in the last draft in 2003, and then it went to the what is now defunct, the UK Film Council.
And then in the end, it's been financed.
And in the end, I just said, well, it was so horrible. I said, we're never going to get it made. We're just not going to get it made. Anyway, Roy Bolter and Saul Papadopoulos from Hurricane said, we'll raise the money. But there wasn't enough. There wasn't enough money. And how it got made, I really don't know. Because in many ways, it was very hard work. Wonderful cast. Wonderful.
That's Peter Mullen?
Yes.
And the lead actress is
Agnes Dane, who was a model.
Yes.
She, in fact, the first person I saw, and she looked about 11 years old. And she's like 30 or something. And I thought, she's 11 years old. Anyway, she came in and gave the most extraordinary audition. I said, we found her. And she's an immense talent, that girl. Wonderful ear for, because she comes from Bolton, but has got a wonderful ear for the Scottish accent. And it's an extraordinary performance.
You seem to have a flair for working with actresses. I mean, when you know, if I think about the actresses that you've worked, Gina Rowlands, Gillian Anderson, Cynthia Nixon recently as well. There's a lot of strong lead actresses in your films, and I wonder whether that's related back to your own family circumstances, being you know, with a group of sisters. Whether there's a rapport that you have with women that
I think
is strong.
And also, what I think, and I do think this is true, and all this, it's going to sound like an awful cliche, but I think a lot of gay men do get on with women because there's no ulterior motive. You know, I like their company, especially northern women. Northern British women are just the funniest. They're just fabulous. You know, so I feel at ease with them. It's men I have difficulty with. Because, you know, I've got nothing in common with them, especially if they like sport.
But I think the roles that you give to those actresses, and also the way that you film them, I think allows them to present themselves in more of a genuine way for themselves. So you're not, in a sense, bracketing them in some way.
Well, the important thing is I say I don't want you to act. I say that to everyone. So that if you start acting, it's just false. And cinema, film knows when it's false. If it's felt, it's true. But if you start acting it, I'm not interested. You know, it's just not interesting. So they have to not fall back on mannerism, because a lot of actors, it's easy to fall back on mannerism because it's safe and comfortable. But when you say no, I don't believe that for a second.
Often directors allow them to do that because they're not pushing them. I think that you do tend to push your performers in a very robust way.
But you've got to. But what you can't do is say what I've heard. I believe some Americans say to the actors, "Do it again, but better." I mean, that's outrageous. I mean, any actor would be in their perfect right to go up and just belt him, because that's not direction. That's bullying. But I won't. When it's true, you don't have to do anything. Just tweak it here and there because you think they're on the ball today. Sometimes they're not, and you've got to be able to know when they're, and that's by shot, not just by day. And we split a scene in the film I was cutting about Emily Dickinson, and the scene was shot over 2 days. And it was really difficult getting back into the feel of it the next day. So I said, we won't do that again, because it was really hard. We just missed that something. I don't know what it was. The scene's fine, because it cuts together, thank God. But I said, I'll never do that again.
In your career, the British Film Institute has been a kind of regular supporter of your work.
Yes.
And it's a funder of films which are strong, what we call art cinema. We often face uncertain times in the UK for film producing. Do you have optimism or despair about the state of British film looking forward?
It's not so much the state of British film, the state of British culture, which has now been completely subsumed by America. And we do it on the cheap, and we do it badly. We've always done it badly whenever we try to imitate that country. But now it's becoming little more than a 56th state. If we're not careful, we will have no culture left at all. We'll be like Hawaii, but with lousy weather.
Thank you, Terence Davies.